When she first started taking the medication, she joked that she'd never slept so well in her life. That was before she understood just how completely it would take her out of the world. The drug was prescribed for a serious medical condition she'd been diagnosed with not long after getting married. It wasn't optional. Without it, her body spiraled. With it, she functioned, mostly. But one of the most dramatic side effects was how deeply it knocked her out at night. Not drowsy. Not groggy. Gone. If she took it at 10, by 10:30 she was unconscious in a way that felt almost clinical. Her husband used to tease her about it. "You're like a tranquilized horse," he'd laugh. Nudging her shoulder in the morning when she couldn't remember him trying to wake her. She'd laugh too. It felt harmless. They had always joked like that. Before the diagnosis, before the medication, their sex life had been intense, adventurous, physical in a way that left bruises sometimes, but the good kind, consensual, mutual, exciting. She had loved that part of their relationship. Loved feeling desired. Loved wanting him back. The medication changed that almost overnight. It crushed her libido. Completely. Where once she'd initiated, now she avoided. Where once she'd craved touch, now it felt like an obligation. She hated that about herself. Hated the guilt that crept in when she saw the disappointment flash across his face. He never pressured her directly, but he would sigh sometimes. Make small comments about how much things had changed. She missed who she used to be. He tried to be supportive. At least that's what she told herself. He went to appointments. Sat beside her in waiting rooms. Held her hand when doctors explained the long-term effects of her condition. He had married her before all of this. Before the medication, before the complications. He hadn't signed up for a sexless marriage. So when he joked about solutions, she tried to laugh. One night, early on, he'd said, "You could just lie there and watch TV while I do my thing." She'd frowned. "That's not funny." He'd kissed her temple. "I'm kidding." Another time when she complained about how completely knocked out she felt. He'd said casually, "Maybe I should just have sex with you while you're asleep. That way you don't have to deal with it." She had turned to look at him fully then. "That's not okay." He'd shrugged. "Relax, I wouldn't. It's just a joke." He always let it drop when she pushed back. Always soft it with a smile, a kiss, a change of subject. And because he let it go, she convinced herself it was harmless. Months passed, her health stabilized. Their intimacy didn't. They still had sex occasionally, but now it was something she counted, something she mentally prepared for. Something she endured more than enjoyed. The medication didn't just kill her desire, it made arousal physically difficult. They had to use a lot of lubricant. She felt broken every time. Then she started feeling sick. Not the usual fatigue. Something sharper. Dizzy spells, nausea, a strange fullness low in her abdomen. With the world in the middle of a pandemic, she panicked and called her doctor, convinced she'd caught something serious. Instead, she got the word pregnant. 5 weeks, the OB estimated. She sat there in the exam room staring at the ultrasound image like it belonged to someone else. 5 weeks. That was impossible. She hadn't had sex in at least 2 months. Maybe longer. She remembered the last time because it had been uncomfortable and she'd cried afterward in the bathroom. Frustrated at her own body, she did not cheat. She knew that with absolute clarity. She did not remember being assaulted by anyone else. There was only one possible explanation, and her mind recoiled from it so violently she couldn't look at it directly. When she told her husband, he went pale, shocked, then slowly, cautiously, excited. A miracle, he called it. They'd been told her condition made pregnancy highly unlikely. He pulled her into his arms and laughed with relief. She was so grateful he didn't accuse her of cheating that she didn't question why he wasn't more confused about the timeline. It took a few days for that thought to settle in. 5 weeks. She started counting backward in her head. She couldn't remember a single night in that window where they'd had sex. But she did remember waking up some mornings with a familiar soreness. A dull pelvic pressure that usually followed rough sex. She remembered once noticing a bruise on her hip and assuming she'd bumped into something in her sleep. She remembered a morning where her underwear felt slightly twisted, like it had been pulled down and back up. At the time, she'd brushed all of it aside. Now it felt different. She lay awake one night, ironically, unable to sleep without the medication she'd stopped taking, replaying his old jokes in her head. "Maybe I should just have sex with you while you're asleep." The words didn't feel like jokes anymore. She tried to talk herself down. The medication could mess with memory, couldn't it? She'd read the pamphlet dozens of times. It listed dizziness, fatigue, dry mouth. Nothing about blackouts or sexual behaviors. Still, doubt crept in. What if she was misremembering? She confronted him carefully at first, not accusing, just confused. "I don't understand how this happened," she said, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. "The dates don't line up." He looked at her like she'd insulted him. "We've had sex," he said flatly. "Not in that window. You're misremembering." She felt her stomach drop. "I'm not." He leaned back, arms crossed. "The medication messes with your head sometimes." It was true that it made her foggy in the mornings. True that she'd occasionally forgotten small details. But not this. Not something like this. She swallowed. "You used to joke about having sex with me while I was asleep." His expression hardened immediately. "That was a joke." "I know, but what?" His voice rose slightly. You think I raped you? The word hung in the air like something poisonous. I don't know what to think, she whispered. He stood up so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. That's a disgusting thing to accuse me of. She felt herself shrinking under the force of his anger. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe fear was twisting everything. I'm just scared, she tried. I just need to understand. You're not thinking straight, he snapped. You're pregnant and hormonal and looking for problems. He stormed out of the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the word rape echoing in her ears. That night she didn't sleep at all. She lay in the dark staring at the ceiling, replaying every morning she'd woken up feeling sore. Every time she'd assumed the bruises were clumsiness. Every time she'd brushed off discomfort because she didn't want to be dramatic. She thought about how completely unconscious she was on that medication. How you could blast a fire alarm beside her and she wouldn't wake up. If someone moved her body, would she know? If someone entered her, would she feel it? Her mind kept circling back to one horrifying possibility. What if the baby inside her existed because he'd decided her unconscious body was easier than her refusal? She pressed her hands to her stomach, torn between joy and dread. If this pregnancy was the result of consent, it was a miracle. If it wasn't, it was something else entirely. And she didn't know which version of her life she was living. The next morning she convinced herself she had overreacted. That was the pattern. Panic. Confrontation. His anger. Her retreat. She hated that she had even said the word rape out loud. It felt nuclear. It felt like something that once spoken could never be taken back. She had watched his face when she said it. The disbelief, then outrage, and a part of her wanted to erase it from existence. To rewind the conversation and choose safer words. So she turned the suspicion inward instead. Maybe the medication really was affecting her memory more than she thought. Maybe she had initiated something and forgotten. Maybe she had woken up briefly and consented and drifted back under without realizing it. The possibilities felt easier to swallow than the alternative. She called her primary doctor first. She framed the questions carefully, trying not to sound hysterical. Could the medication cause blackouts? Could it make someone engage in sexual behavior while asleep? Could it wipe specific memories? The doctor was firm. No, the medication was not a sedative. It caused deep sleep, yes, but not sleepwalking or sexual behaviors. It did not create black holes in memory for consensual events. If she had been awake and participating in sex, she would remember it. She felt a strange mix of relief and dread at that answer. Relief because she wasn't losing her mind. Dread because if she wasn't losing her mind, then something else was wrong. She scheduled an appointment with her OB/GYN next. The first ultrasound had dated the pregnancy at 5 weeks. That number had lodged in her brain like a splinter. 5 weeks meant conception within a window. She was certain they had not had sex. The OB/GYN reassured her gently that early dating can be imprecise. It could be off by as much as 2 or even 3 weeks depending on implantation timing and cycle irregularities. The fetus was small. The measurements were estimates. So it could be 8 weeks? She asked quietly. It's possible, the doctor said. We'll have a clearer picture at your next scan. She left the appointment clutching that possibility like a lifeline. 8 weeks. 8 weeks meant there had been one night, one specific night, that fit. A night she remembered clearly. They had gone to bed early. She had taken her medication, but she had not fallen asleep yet. He had kissed her neck, slow and careful. She had hesitated, then agreed. It had been awkward and dry and required too much lubricant, but she had been awake, present, participating. If the pregnancy dated back to that night, then everything else was just fear. She clung to that thought. But her marriage had shifted in the meantime. They moved around each other like strangers. He slept on the couch some nights, claiming her tossing and turning kept him up. When they spoke, it was about the baby, logistics, doctor appointments, whether they needed to start looking at cribs. The air between them was tight, brittle. She locked herself in the bedroom often, claiming fatigue. In reality, she was hiding from the look in his eyes. It wasn't just anger. It was something colder, resentment. She had accused him of something unforgivable, and she couldn't tell whether she should apologize or double down. She replayed the mornings she'd woken up sore, the times her underwear had felt shifted, the bruises on her thighs that she couldn't explain. She tried to convince herself that pregnancy hormones could cause pelvic pressure, that bruises happened all the time, that her brain was assembling random data into a horror story. 3 days later, she had her second ultrasound. She lay back on the table, staring at the ceiling as the technician moved the wand across her abdomen. The screen flickered, a tiny shape appeared. The tech measured, adjusted, measured again. Looks like about 8 weeks, she said finally. The words hit her like a physical wave. 8 weeks. The miracle night. The night she remembered. She started crying right there on the table. It wasn't just relief, it was humiliation. She had accused her husband of rape when the timeline proved otherwise. The baby had been conceived during consensual sex. She went home determined to fix what she had broken. He was in the kitchen when she walked in. It's 8 weeks, she said immediately. The first estimate was wrong. He looked up, expression unreadable. So, he said, so that night, the one I remember. That's when it happened. Silence stretched between them. He nodded once. Good, he said flatly. So I didn't rape you. The word came out of his mouth like a weapon. I'm sorry, she whispered. I was scared. You tried to ruin my life, he shot back. Do you know what that accusation does to someone? I know. Her throat tightened. I just needed to understand. He shook his head. You think so little of me. She didn't know how to answer that. For a brief moment she thought maybe this would be the turning point. The misunderstanding cleared up. The pregnancy secured in consensual memory. They could rebuild. But the damage had already seeped too deep, sharper. They tried to watch a movie together a few nights later, an attempt at normalcy. She leaned into him on the couch, desperate for reassurance. When the credits rolled, he didn't move away. Instead, he turned to her. Do you really think I could rape you? He asked. Her heart began pounding immediately. I don't know what I thought, she said honestly. I was spiraling. That's not an answer. She started crying again, the tears coming too easily lately. Hormones, she told herself. Pregnancy made everything raw. Before she could speak, he started laughing. Not a soft laugh, not nervous, a cruel one. I couldn't get you wet enough to penetrate you if I tried, he said. It felt like he had slapped her. Her condition made arousal difficult, painful. They used large amounts of lubricant every time they had sex so she wouldn't tear. He knew how insecure she was about that. He knew how broken it made her feel. That's not funny, she said, voice shaking. I think it is, he replied. The fight escalated quickly. He accused her of trying to destroy his reputation. She apologized again and again, desperate to smooth it over. She said she had been terrified that he wasn't the man she thought he was. That's when his expression changed. Something in his jaw tightened. And he said, almost casually, I tried a couple times while you were asleep. Her entire body went cold. What? She breathed. I tried to finger you, he said. But I couldn't get anywhere. She stared at him, uncomprehending. You were desperate, he continued. You wouldn't have sex with me. I just tried. She felt like the room was tilting. That's rape, she said faintly. No, it's not, he snapped immediately. We're married. Her lungs stopped working properly. He went on. I tried going down on you once too. To get you wet enough, but it didn't work. Her ears were ringing now. And yeah, I used your hand a couple times, but that's not rape. It's just hands. Not my penis. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. He looked almost offended that she was shaking. You really hurt me accusing me of rape, he said. And I never did that. I never penetrated you with my penis while you were asleep. I stopped. She started screaming. Demanding to know if he was telling the truth. Demanding details. Demanding how many times. Demanding why. He screamed back. It's not rape because we're married, he insisted. And I didn't actually have sex with you. She slid down onto the floor, hyperventilating. Her mind raced backward through every morning she'd woken up sore. Every bruise. Every moment she doubted herself. He hadn't penetrated her with his penis while she slept. But he had entered her body. He had used her body. He had done it while she was unconscious. And he believed that wasn't rape. She suddenly understood something terrifying. The pregnancy had been conceived consensually. But that didn't mean she had imagined the rest. The house felt different after his confession, but not in a dramatic way. It wasn't loud or chaotic. It was quieter than it had ever been before, like something invisible had cracked, and the air was holding its breath. He slept in the living room that night. She locked the bedroom door, not because she thought he would force his way in, but because she no longer trusted the space between them. Something fundamental had shifted. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, one hand resting on her stomach. She kept replaying his words over and over in her mind, trying to see if she had misunderstood something. He said it wasn't rape. He said they were married. He said it was only his fingers. He said he had stopped when it didn't work, but none of that changed the core truth. He had entered her body while she was unconscious. He had used her while she was asleep. The next morning he acted almost normal. He made coffee, asked if she needed anything from the store, and avoided looking at her directly. The dissonance was overwhelming. How could someone admit to that and then casually ask about groceries? They didn't talk about what he admitted. When they spoke at all, it was clipped and practical. Bills, doctor appointments, small household logistics. The baby became the only neutral topic. Everything else felt radioactive. Every time his tone shifted slightly, she instinctively placed her hand over her stomach. It wasn't that she thought he would hit her. It was that her body no longer recognized him as safe. She started noticing patterns she had ignored before. The way he framed sex as something she owed him. The way he reminded her that he had stayed after her diagnosis. As if staying entitled him to her body. As if illness was a debt she needed to repay. For months she had carried guilt about her low sex drive. Now that guilt was beginning to morph into something else. Anger. A slow, simmering anger that made her stomach twist. She had told him she wasn't comfortable with those jokes. She had been clear that she didn't like the idea of sex while sleeping. He had smiled and dropped it at the time. Except he hadn't dropped it. He had just waited. Waited until she was unconscious. Waited until the medication took her under. Waited until she couldn't say no. A few days later she tried to speak calmly. "We need to talk about what you admitted," she said. He immediately became defensive. "I already told you I didn't rape you." The word hung between them like something fragile and explosive. "You penetrated me while I was asleep," she said carefully. "We're married," he responded, as if that settled it. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was belief. He genuinely believed that marriage granted him access. He believed that desperation justified touching her. He believed that fingers didn't count. That oral didn't count. That using her hand didn't count. She realized then that the pregnancy had distracted her from the bigger truth. Yes, the baby had been conceived on a night she remembered clearly. But that didn't undo the other nights. It didn't erase the violation. It didn't restore trust. She began sleeping with her phone beside her pillow. Not to record him, not to trap him, but because she needed to feel connected to something outside of that house. She quietly reviewed their finances. They lived paycheck to paycheck. She was out of work. Leaving felt financially impossible. Staying felt emotionally suffocating. One afternoon, she stood in the bathroom staring at her reflection. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. "You're okay," she whispered to herself. It didn't feel true, but she needed to hear it anyway. Trust isn't about whether someone is calm today. It's about knowing they respect you when you're vulnerable. And she no longer believed he respected her vulnerability. He tried to smooth things over. He bought her favorite snacks. He offered to rub her back. Every gesture felt transactional now. Every kindness felt like a negotiation. She imagined raising a child in that house. Imagined teaching that child about consent. Imagined explaining that marriage does not erase the word no. The contradiction made her chest tighten. One night he asked again, "Do you really think I could rape you?" She hesitated. He demanded an answer. Before she could speak, he laughed bitterly and said, "I couldn't even get you wet enough if I tried." The cruelty of it stunned her. He framed her medical condition as a shield. As proof that penetration would have been impossible. But he had already admitted to trying. Already admitted to penetrating her with his fingers. Already admitted to using her hand. The logic didn't matter anymore. The admission did. She started locking the bedroom door consistently. He stayed on the couch. They moved around each other like strangers sharing a hallway. Silence filled the house. Sometimes she caught him watching her. Sometimes she wondered if he was angry she hadn't forgiven him. Sometimes she wondered if he still didn't understand what he had done. The pregnancy progressed regardless of their tension. Doctor appointments came and went. The baby grew. She felt the first flutter one afternoon and burst into tears. Life was moving forward whether she was ready or not. She imagined leaving. Imagined packing quietly. Imagined finding a small apartment somewhere. Then she imagined doing it alone, pregnant, unemployed. Fear and clarity wrestled inside her daily. He insisted he loved her. He insisted he would never hurt her. But he also insisted it wasn't rape. That was the fracture she couldn't ignore. If he couldn't name it, he couldn't truly regret it. If he couldn't regret it, he could justify it again. She didn't know yet what her future looked like. She didn't know if this was the end of her marriage. But she knew one thing with painful clarity. She had not imagined it. She had not overreacted. Marriage did not erase her right to consent. And she would never let someone convince her otherwise again.